In 2008, Roy Choi had $800 to his name. He owed money to everybody that he knew. His culinary career was basically over. So he bought a used food cart and parked it on a street corner in LA. Then he sent out a tweet. 18 months later, his business was doing $2 million per year. This is how he did it, and more importantly, what the business model actually looked like behind the scenes. Roy Choi wasn't some Silicon Valley wonderkin. He wasn't born into money, and he didn't have investors or connections. He was a classically trained chef who had, by his own admission, completely lost his way. He grew up in Los Angeles, the son of Korean immigrants who ran a restaurant. From a young age, Roy was surrounded by food, by flavors, by the chaos of a working kitchen. But somewhere between culinary school and his 30s, things fell apart. He burned through jobs at high-end restaurants. He struggled with addiction and gambling. At one point, he was sleeping on friends' couches with no money and no plan. The culinary world had basically written him off. And here's the thing. This isn't background noise. This matters. Because somebody who eventually built a $2 million food business was just someone who had absolutely nothing to fall back on. No safety net, no plan B. Just one skill. He could cook. In 2008, his friend Mark Manjura came to him with an idea. Split the cost of a used taco truck. 2 guys, 1 truck, hit the streets of LA. Roy said yes, not because he had a grand vision, but because he had no other options. And then he did something that nobody in the food industry was doing at the time. Like Chef from Jon Favreau's Chef, he opened a Twitter account, and every single night he tweeted the exact location of where the truck would be. This sounds obvious in 2026, in the age of social media. In 2008, it was completely unheard of. Twitter had only launched 2 years earlier. Most businesses didn't even have websites, let alone social media accounts. But Roy understood something instinctively. If people didn't know where to find you, it didn't matter how good your food was. Within weeks, lines were forming around the block. Within months, he had a cult following. The truck was called Kogi BBQ, Korean Mexican fusion tacos. Each taco was $2, served late at night on the streets of LA, and it was about to change the food industry forever. Here's where it really gets interesting, because Roy didn't just get lucky. He didn't just make good food and hope for the best. He made a series of very deliberate decisions that most food businesses never think to make. Decision number 1. He found a niche and clinched down harder than anyone else. Korean barbecue tacos sound insane, at least they did in 2008, and that's exactly why it worked. Think about what LA looked like in 2008. You had thousands of taco trucks, Korean barbecue restaurants on every corner. The city was saturated with both. But nobody, not one single operator, was combining the two. Korean marinated beef inside a corn tortilla, topped with kimchi salsa and chili soy glaze, at $2 on the street at midnight. Sounds amazing. The product itself was the marketing. People didn't just eat there. They took photos, they talked about it, they argued about whether it was Korean food or Mexican food. And every argument was free advertising. There's a lesson here that goes way beyond food. In a crowded market, weird wins. The thing that makes people say, that's weird, that's strange, I don't know if I'd like that, is the same thing that makes them tell their friends. Decision number 2. He used social media as an operations tool, not a marketing tool. This is the one that a lot of people might miss. Every night, the truck moved locations, as food trucks do. And every night, Roy tweeted the exact address, sometimes just 30 minutes before arriving. He wasn't just posting for engagement. He was running his logistics through Twitter. The tweet wasn't, come check us out. It was, we're at 3rd in Vermont in 20 minutes. This created something incredibly powerful for business, urgency. If you didn't follow Koji on Twitter, you might miss them entirely tonight. So people followed. They refreshed their feeds. They told their friends to follow. By month 6 of opening the truck, Koji had over 50,000 Twitter followers for a taco truck in 2008. When Twitter itself only had about 6 million users worldwide. That's not marketing, that's a distribution system. Roy had essentially built a direct line to his customers that no restaurant, no food truck, no competitor could replicate overnight. And here's the third decision. He scaled horizontally before scaling vertically. When most successful food businesses hit their stride, they do one thing. They open a restaurant, a proper place, 4 walls, a dining room, a liquor license. Roy looked at that option, which would have cost probably between $400,000 and $600,000 minimum in LA, and he said no. Instead, he bought more trucks. Truck 2, Truck 3, Truck 4, each one operating in a different part of the city, hitting different neighborhoods, serving different crowds on different nights. The overhead on each truck was a fraction of a restaurant build out. And every new truck multiplied the revenue without multiplying the risk. It seems obvious in hindsight. At the time, it was a genuinely contrarian move. Okay, now let's get into the actual business, the actual numbers, because this is where the case study gets really interesting. Most people hear food truck and think small. They think side hustle. The reality is that a well-run food truck operation has some of the best unit economics in the entire restaurant industry. Now let me show you why. First, let's do the restaurant math so you understand what Roy was avoiding. A typical sit-down restaurant in a major city runs like this. Food costs eat 28 to 35% of revenue. Labor, as in front of house, back of house, and management, takes another 30 to 35%. Rent in a city like LA, easily 10 to 15% of revenue. That's before utilities, insurance, credit card fees, repairs, all that stuff. By the time you add it all up, most restaurants net somewhere between 3 and 9% profit, 3 to 9 cents on every dollar in a good year. And that's why over 60% of restaurants fail in their first year. The model is brutal. Now let's talk about the food truck math. No rent, zero. The truck itself is a one-time capital expense. A used commercial truck in 2008 ran between $20,000 and $50,000. No dining room staff, no hostess, no servers, no busboys. No expensive build out. There's no tile, no lighting, no plumbing renovation. Kogi's overhead on each food truck was a fraction of what a brick and mortar would cost. Here's what the numbers look like on high performing food trucks. The average revenue per truck per day, $1,500 to $3,000. Kogi, with its lines, cult following, and all of its popularity, was consistently hitting the top of that range. Operating costs, food, fuel, commissary fees, and a two-person crew, around 55 to 60% of revenue. Net margin per truck, 35 to 40%. Compare that to the restaurant's 3 to 9%. The food truck is not the lesser business. In many cases, it's the better one. Now let's run the math on his 4 trucks. 4 trucks averaging $2,000 a day. That's $8,000 a day for all the trucks combined. $56,000 a week, $240,000 a month. Annualized, that's $2.88 million a year, with almost zero advertising spend. The Twitter following did the work. Word of mouth did the rest. Each person who waited in line and told someone about it was unpaid marketing for the brand. But here's what most people miss about this business model. Roy knew the trucks had a ceiling. They break down, health inspectors shut them down, city permits get complicated, and you can only be in one location at a time. So he was already thinking about what came next, before most people even knew his name. He used the truck's reputation as leverage. The press coverage, the Twitter following, the cult status, all of it became proof that the brand had real demand. And he used that proof to do 3 things. First, he licensed the Kogi brand to other operators, collecting fees without running the trucks himself. Second, he opened Chego, a brick and mortar rice bowl restaurant, using the credibility and customer base Kogi had already built. Third, he eventually got Kogi products into grocery stores, retail distribution, passive revenue, scalable in a way that 4 trucks could never be. The truck was never the end game. It was a proof of concept, a marketing engine, a brand builder, not a forever business, just a launch pad. So you might be saying, what can I take from this? I'm not really interested in a food truck. I'm more of just interested in general entrepreneurship. I have a different business idea I'm thinking of starting. Whether or not you want to start a food business, a tech startup, or a one-person agency, the framework Roy used is directly applicable. And let's go over some key lessons that you can learn from his success. Lesson 1, constraint is a feature, not a bug. Roy couldn't afford a restaurant, so he got a truck. That limitation forced him into a lower overhead, higher mobility model that turned out to be structurally better than what he could have built with more money. Most people look at constraints and see problems. Roy looked at his constraints and found a competitive advantage. When you're forced to do more with less, you often stumble into the better path. The path that a well-funded competitor would never think to take because they didn't have to. Ask yourself, what constraint in your situation might actually be pointing you toward a better model? That's your advantage. Lesson number 2, distribution is the product. Kogi's tacos were great, but there are a lot of great tacos in LA. What made Kogi different, what made it a phenomena, was how people found them. The Twitter system wasn't just marketing, it was infrastructure. It was the mechanism that got people to the product. And Roy treated it with the same seriousness that he treated the food. This applies everywhere. A great product with no distribution is a hobby. A good product with exceptional distribution is a business. What is your distribution channel? What's the mechanism that gets your thing in front of people? because that answer is just as important as whatever you're building. Now, the third lesson: build a proof of concept before you build the empire. Roy didn't just start 4 trucks and a brand licensing deal. He started with 1 truck and a Twitter account. He tested the concept of his business. He found the audience, proved there was demand, and then, only then, did he use that momentum to expand. The food truck wasn't the business, it was the validation. And that framework, start small, prove it, then scale, is one you can apply to almost anything. Before you build the big version, build the version that tells you whether the big version is even worth building. Kogi BBQ went on to become one of the most influential food businesses in the last few decades. Not because Roy had money, connections, or a plan B. He had $800, a used truck, and a Twitter account. If you'd like to see more case studies like this, real businesses, real numbers, real strategies, hit subscribe. I put out 2 of these every week, and the next one is going to cover a business model that's even simpler than a food truck, and it's quietly making people 6 figures with almost no staff. You don't want to miss it.